you mind if I just say one last thing, take 30 seconds of your time?
Sure, of course.
Yeah, so basically, in the beginning of time, just human civilization was very primitive, and there was wars, and there was fighting, and there's terrible things going on. And through voluntary cooperation and capitalism, as in billions of people have been lifted out of poverty. And I think that's really, really important for people to realize. And as nations become very wealthy, the people at the top like to look around and sensationalize a few people at the bottom and use it to strong-arm the electorate by promising free things and by running deficits and by doing really immoral things. So I want your listeners to realize that Bernie Sanders is probably the most immoral candidate running for president.
Fuck
in
yeah.
2020. And that's all I got.
Let me just ask you one more question, Colt. You're a millennial. Give me just your age range, just so I have a sense of like what we got going
28.
on. 28. And that's Millennials for Liberty or Freedom? Which one was it?
Millennials meets liberty.
Okay. All right, Colt.
That's
well,
a
good
good
luck
title.
with your thing. And do not hesitate to call back in at some other time.
That's a clever name, legit. I like that.
Can we find another
Yeah, it's
case
fun,
of somebody
guys. I
dying
really
from medical
appreciate it. Thank
debt
you very much.
so we can exploit them for the greater immoral? Does anybody have a story of a kid getting ripped off of their medication so we can sensationalize for immoral purposes? Thank you.
All right.
I think the surge
thanks,
in
Colt.
the numbers really started to change when we could find more immiserated people who really are.
Every dollar that I tax a high frequency trade and it's directed to education, I get off on the immorality.
I get off on the pure fucking immorality of it. That Wall Street money turned to a free college. It makes me hard. It's so sick. It's so wrong.
I'm trying to like look up. Jesus. All right.
Then you get rid of medical debt and you invest it in green jobs. You know how depraved that is?
Gonna be so
I
bad.
We're going to be so
Now, hold on.
sick.
I should know this off the top of my head. But theft, the definition of theft is to steal something. The definition of stealing is to take without permission or legal right. Now, here's the problem. Here's the problem with Colt's perspective on this. Law is a function of government. It is a function of government. Law can only be enforced. It's not voluntary. It's law. You can either voluntarily comply with the law or not, but law is not voluntary. It is a law.
What's hilarious?
It means that there will be consequences, legal consequences if you do it. The law is set up by government. If the government passes a law that says taxation is legal, guess what? It's legal. Now, you could say it's immoral. You should not be able to set up a currency that you then disseminate and create value by taxing it. You could say that's immoral, and I don't know. It's a function of your system of morality.
Is there any way we could cover more people with health care?
But it's just a fact. It's just a fact. It's not theft. It is not theft. That is a fact. You can say that it's immoral for governments to pass laws that say you can tax. But that's, in my mind, silly, because if they didn't tax, then the money that you have in your pocket would be worthless.
All right. And as Ben Burgess, this is Give Them an Argument. I am now joined. This is exciting because usually when I tell my wife Jennifer, who's going to be on the show, the names never mean anything to her, and they still didn't tonight. But I guess it's Sam Cedar said, "Who's that?" And I said, "Well, he's the voice of Hugo on Bob's Burgers," and it's like, okay, that meant something to her. So, thank you so much for joining me, Sam.
My pleasure. It's a real pleasure to be here. And yes, it's the Hugo thing opens a lot more doors than my actual name. I can assure you. And it's across. It's a multi-generational thing too, actually.
How's that?
Like, well, my kid only cares that I'm Hugo. That's it. Everything
Fair
else is completely trivial to her.
Fair enough. Well, I do enjoy Bob's Burgers, but the reason that I wanted you on was to talk about your many debates with libertarians. That you were telling me before we started that you feel like they've the libertarians don't come as much as they used to. But you did quite a few of these, and.
Yes.
Obviously this is like right at the core of what we're interested in on this show, and I've done quite a bit, and in some cases with the same people, but I mean you have a particular way of doing these that's unique and fun to watch, and thought it might be interesting to watch a few of these together and to kind of talk about some of the bigger themes that emerge from them. Forrest, do we have the dependent or independent of government guy?
Let me say just first off, the fun thing for me when I watched just that clip that you started with is really watching Michael on some level, because when we would do the show, I'm in a mode where like more often than not, I'm not trying to like laugh and consume what we're doing. And so when I watch back on these things, I end up like, I think appreciating what Michael's doing more than I did in the moment, actually. And in certain situations. But,
no, I mean, I could see that. I mean, like there are so many of these things where he is, he's doing what he did, and you like, obviously, you don't want to you don't want to start cracking up for one thing, as far as what you're trying to do with the collards. You'll kind of ruin it if you started doing that.
Right.
So you're just sitting there, being completely straight faced, during stuff like the evil Bernie bit, or one of my all time favorites is the guy, the anarcho-capitalist caller, whose ultimate solution to potential problems caused by wealth inequality in his utopia was assassinations.
I mean, yeah,
it's,
if you sprinkle them around enough.
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
And part of what makes that clip so golden is that Michael, since in his role that he could just do that, right, is just cracking up while this guy's talking, and he's getting offended by it. It's like, oh, what's he saying? And you're like, oh yeah, no, it's very disrespectful. Now about the assassination.
Yes, it's true.
All right, let's watch the clip.
I wanted to talk to you guys, ask you 3 questions, and you guys can pick the one. Hello?
Yes.
And you guys can pick the one that you find to be most juicy. They're not gotcha. They're very simple.
Okay.
The one is would you rather people be independent or dependent on the government? The second is do you think that the Trump administration and Republicans generally don't want witnesses to be called in the impeachment trial? And the third is, would you prefer that people get in a position where they must contemplate an abortion, or not get in that position in life? The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Blake. I would say that the question is silly. This is the first question. Do I want people independent or dependent of government? There is no one who lives in society that is independent of government. That is an impossibility. That's like saying, would you prefer people have can fly or not fly? Well, it doesn't matter, because you know what? We don't have wings. The reality is, can you tell me a person who lives in this country who is independent of the government?
I know a couple, yes.
Who?
They, Al and Sheila, I'm not going to say their last name, but they're close friends of mine.
And
they live in northwestern Arkansas.
They do?
Yes.
And
they live out in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere.
They are completely they're completely solar. They have wells. Obviously,
where did they
I
get
knew
the
this would
solar
happen,
technology?
I knew this would.
Did they develop
What's
this
that?
solar technology?
No, they didn't.
What?
I knew
That's
this would
weird.
happen, and what I wanted from you guys was just a very simple answer. It's a very simple question. Like I said, it wasn't a got you.
No, well, like
Yes,
I say,
obviously government-
your question is,
Obviously, government exists.
Blake,
Obviously,
are
government
you married?
exists, and it has done things.
Blake, are you married?
No.
You're not married?
No.
You have a girlfriend, boyfriend?
Yes, girlfriend.
When did you stop beating her? It's a simple question.
Sam,
Just give me a date.
it's ridiculous.
Just give me a date. Simple question.
Christ.
All right, let me ask you this. I'll make it even simpler. Did you stop beating her?
Well,
Blake, this is a simple
ridiculous
question.
statement.
This is a question.
Yeah.
It's a simple question. Did you stop beating her?
you're assuming the presumption that I have before.
Ah,
That's not the
okay.
same- that's not-
And
that's not
now
the
I
same-
think
that's
we've
not
been
the
able to
same question.
illustrate my problem with your question, which is assumes that it's possible for people to live in this country when they're not, in some fashion,
I didn't say
dependent
it was-
upon government.
I didn't say it was possible or impossible. What I asked is,
Well, I
is it
didn't
better
say
if
whether you
people live
had.
independent
I didn't say whether you had or had not
or
beaten your
dependent upon
girlfriend.
the
I'm just
government?
asking if you stopped.
Like I said, that's a presumption. That's
Right.
an assumption.
Right. Well,
that I
you're
did at
presuming
one point.
that being independent of government is
people-
possible.
People have.
Yeah.
I can't even remember any of these, but it was fun. It was fun to watch.
Yeah.
The-
That's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is. I have to say that, like, you know, I feel like there are people who probably see this and say, "Well, look, it's a self-selected group of people who
Sure.
call into a show," and but there is a quality about libertarians that I think, in my experience, is not just a function of people called into the show. I interviewed like gosh,
we
you know what would happen if I interviewed the Block. I can't even
Walter
remember
Block,
the name. Yeah, Walter Block, who I was very nervous prior to interviewing him. Like I was telling Michael, like, I gotta bone up on this stuff. This guy's a professor at I can't remember where he was at the time, but it was some like Koch endowed division of a school, but it was a legit school, and he was an advisor to Ron Paul, at least he claimed to be, and no reason to doubt him. And but across the board, they make these just sort of like assertions, or they are just caught up in honestly like the most basic of like logic games and stuff that you just get the sense that they've never been challenged by. It's every time I talk to a libertarian, it feels like, have you run this by anybody yet? Or you're just so convinced of what you're saying, and it doesn't feel like you have in any way had a conversation with someone who's inclined to disagree with what you're asserting.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. Like at the end of the Evil Bernie clip we used as a cold open, like what you're going through is a really like basic, like actually two really basic objections to the idea that taxation is theft. Which like roughly, if all right, what does that mean, right? That they said, oh, that it's theft, that you're taking something that people are entitled to. Well, entitled to in what sense? Can't mean legally entitled, because the IRS is legally entitled to that share of your income. It can mean, morally entitled, but then like that gets like pretty circular. Like you say, well, it's morally wrong to take what it's morally wrong to take. It's like, okay, but what's morally wrong to take? And then the other is whether, the other objection, that you're running at the end is that you like wouldn't like this wealth that you have to tax in the first place, wouldn't be generated in the first place if not for the existence of taxation, which is the point that you're making with the dependent or independent guy in the clip that we just watched in a different way. And and whatever. I mean, like I don't rule out that there could be libertarians, who have good answer, like somewhat plausible responses to these things. But it is remarkable how many of them don't see that coming, because those seem pretty basic.
Yeah, I find it stunning. I am continually amazed by libertarians who get stumped as soon as they start to enter into the real world in some way. There's a big boy in the plastic bubble quality, and I do mean boy.
Yeah, no, definitely boy. There's a this is something that that does clearly appeal more to guys, and could speculate about why that is.
Yeah.
But it is also just really interesting on a really basic level, because so many of these guys like really fetishize like the rhetorical aura of like logic and argumentation, like that's very important to them. Like going back to like Ayn Rand and people like that, like they were so in love with the idea of that. But yeah, you do often get this sense that they're mostly used to talking to each other, that they, like people who maybe share certain like really basic, intuitions about, taxation being wrong and, and things like that. And oftentimes like just don't see it coming, like these sorts of basic replies, or maybe just kind of don't know like what people say who disagree with them about this.
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, I think, for me, I'm not a terribly theoretical person. I mean, even in college, I didn't, my courses were not, we didn't have a political science major. We had a government major. And so it didn't mean anything to me at the time, really. I had nothing to compare it to, but my inclination is not to really get too caught up in the theoretical. I mean, that's that's always been my approach, for better or for worse. And so at least in these contexts, I feel like I have sort of an advantage because they're talking in a theoretical level and I'm just talking in a sort of a more, I guess, present perspective. Right. Like we know what would happen if you raised McDonald's, if fast food restaurants were required to raise their minimum wage. We know what would happen. We know the impact it would have even if they didn't absorb any of the loss in profits, even if it was just passed on. We know exactly how much they would have to charge extra on a burger. I mean, it would be something like, I don't know, 15, 20 cents. So
wouldn't it make, I mean, look at the difference between Costco and Walmart. I mean, Costco has chosen to pay its employees much higher than Walmart, and as a consumer, I go to Costco instead of Walmart. So if you're trying to make business decisions, to make business decisions on behalf of McDonald's, I recommend that you buy McDonald's. We love to use.
Hey, right now I'm subsidizing McDonald's right now, and you are too. We're both subsidizing McDonald's right now, because the reason why those workers don't die of hunger is because something like, what is it? 40% of them are on food stamps. We're also paying for their Medicaid. In fact, McDonald's has part of their budget is to pay people to advise their own employees to go have the government pay and subsidize their business by paying for food stamps and Medicaid. And I have no problem, frankly, with the idea in general of making sure that poor people who can't afford to eat or get medicine will get that. But at the same time, you can't argue to me that this is all just McDonald's purview. I'm sorry. I'm supporting their workforce.
I mean, it sounds to me that, we shouldn't be buying anything from McDonald's. This sounds like a horrible place to buy a burger.
Well, that's not the point here. McDonald's, Burger King, it doesn't matter.
Well,
Walmart, we do the same thing with Walmart. We do the same thing with Walmart.
There's a local burger joint right around the corner from me that pays their employees $15 an hour, and I know that because my niece's friend came to live with us.
You're avoiding the point I just made.
No, it's a great point, and that's why I won't buy stuff from McDonald's.
And how much of an impact is that having?
Virtually zero.
Right.
Yeah, which is one that I found interesting because this is something I've noticed with other libertarians. They're sort of very fond of the idea that if you have any problem with anything that's, anything bad in the private sector, or you want like the economic system to be different in some way, then you can just solve this through consumer behavior or like
the market will sort it out.
Yeah. So you can, like a sort of extreme example, this, libertarians who say, hey, you want, you don't think that workers have enough power in regular capitalist workplaces, just, they could just all pool their pennies together and start new worker-owned businesses that they'll start at, and this is the same principle. McDonald's doesn't need to raise its wages. You just need to not buy from McDonald's, which seems like a really like why they do this, right? Like it seems like the real thing is this is the only way of doing anything about this problem that would be consistent with libertarian principles. So, so what else are they going to say? But it's also like they're just kind of often packaging into the way it's asked the assumption that like this is a realistic plan. This is just something that could fix these problems.
Well, I think it's important for them to believe that the market, and they do believe that the market is the most efficient way and of allocating resources, A, and B, I think that it extends into some type of thing that the market is the best expression of morality. In morality, like I wouldn't necessarily put it in terms of morality, but in terms of best outcomes. And so this comes up a lot in the context of like racism and the idea that like, the Civil Rights Act, like, Rand Paul got caught up on this. I think like, I don't know what it was 10 years ago, I think with Rachel Maddow or something to that effect.
Yeah. He was running for Senate first time in like 2012.
Yeah.
And he bit the bullet. He said that he would have voted against the Civil Rights Act because that's stopping private business owners from doing what they want with their property.
Right. And that is always like a sort of almost, I want to say every debate I had with a libertarian ended up there, but a lot of them do, because they believe that it is an infringement, that you cannot have, they believe in this sort of like Lochner era type of notion of of a freedom of contract, and that and that you cannot interfere in commerce that has nothing to do with government. And the idea that, and they say, if it's a restaurant wouldn't serve a black person, I wouldn't go there. And I would imagine that it would never survive. And it's like, wait, I'm sorry. You can't find examples of racist or homophobic or transphobic or misogynist, entities in this country that can survive? Are you serious? Like, of course they can. I mean, some of them like, I don't know, what like Chick-fil-A or
people go to Chick-fil-A specifically to support them.
Yeah, I mean, that's absurd. It's absurd. Yeah. Everybody knows that's absurd. But they have to believe that the market, at least in this context, right? I mean, this is slightly different from well, it's an extension of their belief in property as the key fundamental right. But it gets really uncomfortable for them when they realize like, oh, well, if the government has no say in what happens in terms of commerce, if say I'm black and I go to a small town and they don't allow me at the hotel, well, you could just go to another hotel. Well, you keep
driving every 50 miles and
exactly. Or what if I need to do business there? Like their system breaks down at these points. These are points where they break down. And it is really just I mean, you could go further and talk about the you know the economic implications of their market uber alles, but they ultimately don't care, right? I mean, these are folks who believe that, like, if you die because you can't afford health insurance, that's okay, right? Like, they don't. I mean, I think Ron Paul more or less said the same. Like, that's okay.
No,
that
well,
is,
yeah. I mean, Ron Paul did the thing that's like the equivalent of saying, "Oh, don't worry, you know, the segregated businesses will be punished by the market," for the healthcare example. Sort of like he had, like in, I think it was also 2000. Yeah,
it was specifically about money, though, for him, as opposed to race or creed. And it's just that they, at that point, it's like, well, all right, well, end of conversation, at least on that topic, because, and I should be clear, I'm not trying to convince these guys of anything.
Of course.
I'm trying to demonstrate the ridiculousness of their positions. And so once you get to the point where they say, like, well, yeah, if you don't have the money to pay for health insurance, you don't get health insurance and you die. Okay, thank you. We'll leave that there and move on to something else. Like,
yeah. Once you get up to the point where the guys advocate saying that the solution is assassinations, it's like, all right, I'm done here. This is this is what I wanted to do. I remember Elizabeth Brunig said that half the point of a debate is to get the other person to say what they believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's just like a question of, like, at one point, it's like, well, I get some bad news for you. The vast majority of Americans feel that, no, you shouldn't die because you don't have money. And, people absorb it and digest it in other ways and maybe try and, like, sort of keep it at arm's length. But this guy's out there saying it right out. And it's like, okay, good. You have now shown where this philosophy of yours leads. And my job is done here.
Yeah, because I think that, like, you can have it, like, libertarianism, like anything else. I think you can argue for it either, like, in a consequentialist way, you say this will lead to good outcomes, or on principle, deontologically, you say this is my principle, doesn't matter if it leads to bad outcomes. And oftentimes I think that, like, when people feel the appeal of libertarianism, it's really the in principle thing, because if you're thinking about certain kinds of examples about, it's like, I should be able to, use whatever drugs I want, I should be able to do this and that, then, then this sort of set of principles that sound very appealing and sort of smuggle in all the economic stuff by associating it with those sort of personal autonomy rights. That sounds very appealing. But then when you get down to these questions, which, like, if we're just talking about bodily autonomy, yeah, sure. I mean, you could embrace the, we don't draft people to, like, to take their kidneys against their will, for kidney transplants. And I'm sure we'd all be against that. So that's, yeah, some, people can die because the principle is just that important, but for something like this, well, what, that question that was asked, you were talking about at the presidential debate, when Ron Paul was asked about, okay, what about the worker was healthy and didn't get health insurance, and, he has an operation, and if he doesn't get it, then he'll die. Paul in that case, like, didn't want to just say, yeah, okay, he can die. Although some people in the Republican debate audience, I think, were actually yelling that as he was saying that. But Paul didn't want to say that. He knows how bad that sounds. So he said, well, in the old days, the church would have taken up a collection. You would have paid for it that way. Which is
which if it was true, we would have no need for any of the conversations, right? I mean, it's a lot. I mean, to a certain extent. I mean, at least for me, that is what I think the problem of having, I have some very, very broad principles in the way that I assess our politics, but they are very, very general, because in my experience, the whole idea about deploying this many principles is simply a way of pretending that we're not making choices as a society, that it is like, well, there's certain laws of nature, and there are certain, and I think that's simply a way of obscuring the fact that there are certain choices that we are making as a society. And it's a way of almost in the same way that like a corporation allows things to happen that are no one's responsibility, right? I feel like principles in this context serve that same function. Like this is, look, it's a principle. And when I play my logic games, the principles hold up. And so therefore, I'm sorry, you can't afford health insurance, you die. It's not up to me. It's the way nature works. And it is a way of obscuring the fact that we're making decisions as a society. And I think ultimately that's, that's where we end up at most of the end of these debates.
Right. Fair enough. Forrest, do you have the, there we go.
Do you think there are any rights that we have in America that are not recognized by the U.S. government?
Yeah, I don't, according to the United States government, I don't have the right to secede from the United States of America. According to the United States government, if I decide not to pay certain taxes, I run the risk of either having my stuff seized or going to jail or both.
Okay, wait a second. You don't have the right to secede? Can't you renounce your citizenship?
The United States government claims that if I wish to renounce my citizenship, I must leave the territory that the United States government claims to own, and then I must pay an exit fee of, I believe, $4,500. And there are hoops and hurdles that I have to go through. And if I don't follow those to the letter that the United States government says I'm supposed to follow, they will not recognize the renunciation of citizenship. But why should I have to leave? I should be able to live on the piece of land that I want to live on. And as long as I'm not violating the rights of another person, I should be able to, claim the free state of Darrell.
Okay. But aren't you that property that you're living on, that land, is that really yours? How did you get that property?
Well, based on the current paradigm, nobody can really own land, because try not paying your local property taxes. After 3 years, some local government will come kick you off of your land and sell the land to the highest bidder. So currently, no one can own property.
Okay, so you have no property here. So I don't understand, how would you possibly secede?
Well, right now, you're not allowed to. Right now, if you go buy a piece of land from someone and you say, I don't want to be part of the town, I don't want to benefit in any way from any of the supposed services that the town provides, I'm not going to send you any money, I'm not going to use your schools, I'm not going to use your fire department, I just want to live on my land and be completely self-sufficient and not pay your taxes. After 3 years, the town would come, kick you off of your property, and seize your land.
How would you know it's your land? How would you prove that it's your land?
Well, in theory, you would have a property deed, because that's what happens when you buy property.
Who would issue the property deed?
You get a deed. Well, right now, there are governments that issue those things. And what I'm saying is, we're talking about the current paradigm of how could you own land? And there are things right now that exist. When you go buy land, you get a deed for the land.
Right.
If you're talking about what would happen in a free society, then there would be competing agencies probably that would issue such deeds.
Which one would
You're asking me to centrally plan liberty, and that's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in,
Wait
Sam,
a second. I want to hear about that other paradigm.
Right. Hold on, Sam. Hold on. Let me finish my thought, and if you keep trying to piss me off, I will disconnect from the call. So you're asking me to centrally plan liberty. I'm not interested in centrally planning liberty. I'm interested in promoting the idea of human freedom.
Okay, so wait a second. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you.
Not true.
I'm just trying to figure out.
I think you absolutely did mean to upset me.
No,
I think you absolutely do want to try to push me into a corner to where you can say, see, you don't have the answers of how freedom works. Damn it, Sam. Nobody has all the answers on how freedom works. That's why freedom is so important.
My point is this, is that libertarians, if I'm not mistaken, do not like the fact that a government has a monopoly of force. And I am suggesting that in this case of a piece of property where we don't know who it belongs to, there are 3 agencies that say it's mine. There's 1 agency that says it's yours. You believe that your agency is the most legit agency and that my 3 agencies are corrupt. I believe I've got 3 agencies. 3 is more than 1. Well, you say, look, I'm going to go find 2 other agencies that say that this property belongs to me. And then the question becomes, how do we resolve this? And you're saying like, well, it's just going to work out. And I'm saying that at the end of the day, when we actually walk through this in reality, even if it's your paradigm,
you're saying
your
that
reality,
freedom doesn't work.
I'm saying that's
you're
right.
Saying freedom
I'm
doesn't work.
saying that's correct. That
You're
we're going to need an
that-
authority that's going to adjudicate this. And that authority ultimately is going to have a monopoly of power. And the only way that we're going to function and not end up in a fight that is going to determine this is if we all agree mutually, my agencies, your agencies, my people, your people, we all agree to submit to a authority that has a monopoly of power. Now, the best case scenario is that we make sure that this authority is at least as representative of us as possible. That's what I'm suggesting.
Let me ask this question, Sam.
Yes.
What happens if I don't pay taxes to your authority?
To our authority?
What happens? You're the one saying that we need a group that has legitimate use on the force of violence to force people to do what is best. And I'm saying, what should happen to me if I refuse to pay for your agency that is going to force people to do what you believe is best?
So in other words,
if I decide I don't like your agency killing people in the Middle East, I will not fund that. What should happen to me?
Well, I mean, I think if you don't pay your taxes to our government, they'll ultimately put you in jail.
No, I'm asking you, Sam, what do you think should happen? Not what does happen, because we know what does happen. What do you think? I want you to say it. I want you to say that I belong in jail because I don't pay taxes.
If you don't pay taxes to the U.S. government, ultimately, I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person. Thank you for having me on your show.
Daryl? Heavyweight.
Walter Block looks like the Dalai Lama.
Well, I thought he was talking hypothetically. I don't think that I would necessarily put him in jail right now. But yeah, I think if you don't pay your taxes that are due, yeah, I mean, I think if it's, I think you should get an opportunity to pay a fine first. And but I think he wanted me to say, he kept saying, say. So I said it. And I'm sorry that ended so quickly.
You're a snitch in the world of libertarians, Cedar.
Yeah, it's true.
Snitching them out on all them back taxes they ain't paying. It's fucked up.
We should say that Daryl was a candidate, primary candidate in the 2012 Libertarian, I think, campaign, or maybe it was 2016. I think it was 2012.
I think it was 16, and I think he ran against Johnson.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, yeah.
So was he one of those guys on stage when Johnson was it's legitimate for the government to license drivers?
Yes, and we're booed. I mean, look, I mean, the vision that these guys have of the world, I think, is, it's a nice one. But it is every step along the way that it would take to get to their utopia, which I think is impossible, incidentally, is horrible for people. Like I think like there are, in my mind, utopians on the left, and every step of the way towards that utopia on the left, I think, is good. And so like I don't know that you'll ever get to your utopia, but like if you get an eighth of the way there, it's better than where we are today. If you get a half of the way there, it's better than where we are today.
Right.
You get 3/4 or 7/8 or whatever it is. But with libertarianism, any step in that direction of that utopia you'll never reach is a bad situation as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and like the actual vision of utopia that he just gave, that you have like different private like agencies that are all in the business of like violently enforcing people's rights, like that just sounds. I mean, like that sounds like a dystopia. Like you
That's
like
feudalism. That's Mad Max. It's maybe like
that's
I guess
the world that they want, though.
Well, that's the thing is that ultimately it really behooves you if you have an army already. If you already have amassed a certain amount, like if you are a small, like, duke who has a fairly sizable army, then yeah, actually that might be a good situation. I mean, all of libertarianism, it seems to me, is sort of like, we're going to create a year zero that necessarily leaves me, very often, not me, Sam Cedar, but me, the person speaking, in a position of power that things are going to work out for me if we start from that point. Like that was the conversation with Walter Block. I was like, when do you start counting property rights? Like, and it turned out, I believe, if my memory serves me, if I'm misremembering this, please forgive me, that it was basically when America was colonized.
right.
Coincidentally, we're going to start the clock at that point because of some French theory.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh, well,
emancipation, maybe.
It's like some like how the land is valuable because of the labor you put on it, et cetera, et cetera. We're just going to ignore the labor that actually, the indigenous people who lived here. Like, there's a reason why the forests were so lush in the Northeast, because there was controlled burns, by the Iroquois. We're just going to ignore the fact that like some of these plants are domesticated, some of these animals are domesticated. Like, I'm not even sure that is the way to measure it, but they don't count that. And they go like, we're going to start here. And then from there, everything is going to be really consistent. You just don't go into the forbidden zone, which is before we actually had amassed a certain army, essentially. And that's,
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess there are two. Like, there's the historical issue that which is that a lot of libertarians, like the kind of deontological libertarians, people who think that it doesn't matter if there are bad outcomes, this is just a principle and you have to follow it no matter what, they want to say that, well, it's okay if you have wealth inequality as long as it came about the right way. Nobody's rights were being violated. But then, of course, as you point out, the inequality we actually have did not come about all that way, right? That's like even in like Europe and the UK, we had enclosure of common lands to drive peasants off to like work in factories, and that was a very cozy and consensual history compared to what happened in the New World. But then the other issue is, okay, let's say we could somehow like shake the Etch-a-Sketch so that like we actually did start out with like a completely pristine starting point for all property claims, or we had like, or just the history of the world was very different, and it was just like Adam and Eve and their descendants like freeholding unclaimed land. Even in that scenario, I still want to know about these like competing protection agencies, because that still sounds like a nightmare.
Well, because they haven't been anywhere, right? They've never been to places like Brazil, where there's literally like private in law enforcement.
Yeah, they're like private militias that actually control massive amounts of territory.
And I used to watch your show, Sam. I live in California still. I'm native California. Live in West Oakland, across the street from a very large homeless encampment, which is kind of the epitome of this free market that these guys love.
Right.
It definitely was a free drug market that had no police intervention whatsoever. And there was definitely issues with that free market from, cars exploding randomly from Molotovs and all the other things. But I always think about that. I used to watch these funny calls, living in that environment, and always think, I wish these guys would come down and see this libertarian paradise.
Well, because literally in that scenario, I mean, the thing that people will who say things like that, we can have competing protection agencies. The thing that they'll say is, well, what our theory predicts is that because going to war with each other is very expensive, and there are bad things there, that like what they'll choose to do is like seek adjudication at some like independent court or something like that. It's like, well, you could say the same thing and just predict that like actual literal drug gangs would never go to war with each other because it's very expensive.
It's bad for business. Yeah, of course. Well, Walter Block actually had introduced me to this idea of, I think when we were talking about adjudicating property claims, that, well, I would have my court and he would have his court. And I'm like, okay, so who adjudicates our two courts? And then there would be a third court, and it would just keep going on and on until eventually somebody.
Silly.
No, it's ridiculous. And then ultimately, it all ends with somebody going, you know what? F you. Here's my gun. And then they go like, you know what? Here's my gun. It's bigger. And then that's it. We're just at war. That's basically it. I mean, that's the way it works.
Yeah, mafia families have people that could go to just have sit downs too, but that doesn't mean that they never shoot each other.
Of course. It's like, that is like, we live in a world. Like there's history, it's like, what do people think wars are? Like, what do people think conflict is a function of? It's like, there is, and I've had this conversation, it feels like a million times with a bunch of different guys. There was, gosh, I can't remember his name now, but he was, I'm a very nice guy. Adam
Kokesh.
Yes, Adam Kokesh. And
didn't you have him on too, Ben?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
and he was a very nice guy.
Yeah, sure.
And I thought he was a pretty ballsy guy. I saw some videos of him in the past, but like at one point he's like, I want a piece of land, and I'm only going to take the land that I labor on. And I go, okay, well, so what happens if Chevron shows up and says like, hey man, your land that you're working on, yeah, it's great. You're creating value. You're growing lettuce. There's oil underneath there. So we're going to just set up a drilling unit, if you don't mind, in your garden. Well, I would tell them they can't do that. It's my land. And I'm like, okay. And then what? Because I'm Chevron. And guess what? I got a bigger, in like 15 minutes, I could have a bunch of guys here with baseball bats. If you're lucky, just baseball bats. What are you going to do about it? Well, I'll get my guys with baseball bats. Well, guess what? I'm Chevron. So I just like, whatever number you got, I got 5 times that. And then I'm going to go to your guys and I'm going to say, whatever he's paying you, 5 times that. And then I'm going to start drilling oil in your garden. And that's it. There's no like, that's it. I mean, that's it. And they get a little bit sort of stumped at that moment because it's not, let's face it, like it's not that far from perfect examples that we have in history of Chevron coming in and saying like, we're going to take this and you get an issue with it. Like, suck it.
North Dakota.
Perfect Dakota.
The Bakken in North Dakota. Great example.
Yeah. Never mind all of the like United Fruit Company coups in Latin America.
Exactly.
Oh God.
Exactly.
And they don't understand any of that. That's kind of like not in their wheelhouse.
It's not in their wheelhouse. Yeah, it's not in their wheelhouse. It's not in like their garage. It's not like in their pantry. It's just like, it's very interesting that that never comes up. Like history, like all of this just doesn't seem to compute into the theory that they have. So,
yeah. Right, exactly. Well, really appreciate you coming on, Sam. This is a lot of fun. This is something I wanted to actually. It's an idea I had very soon after the show started. Since as Jason mentioned, like Adam Kokesh, that guy you know, that guy's been on this show to argue with me. Walter Block.
Oh, have you had Walter Block on?
I have had Walter Block on. Yep.
Did he go for the?
No, he didn't. I didn't get any hey. But
did you get anything about Walter had an interesting. The age of consent plays heavily in a lot of
that's interesting, isn't it?
Theories. I mean, yeah, it is interesting. But
so like there's the age of consent stuff, and there's also just the fact that so much of that stuff is like a go-to metaphor for so many of these guys.
It's
like that's like the first thing that they come up with. You know, it's like, well, this is just like rape, or you know, this is just like, you know, pedophilia. It's like. These aren't the metaphors I would have started with.
I know. I find it fascinating that they don't stop and go like, oh, wait a second. There's other people listening to me. Maybe I should actually not. Oh boy, there it is. I would love to see that.
If I were the king of the black people and I wanted to promote black welfare.
This is a clip you want to pull up, huh, Ben?
Yeah, actually, so Sam was looking down at just the right moment for us. Let's have that one more time.
I were the king of the black people, and I wanted to promote black welfare.
The king of the black people. Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah.
How the hell did black people get into y'all's conversation? I just want to know what the hell was y'all talking about to make that man say that if he was the king of the black people right there, the whole call should have stopped and be like, whoa, why did
Ben deceptively edited that because just beforehand, Ben had said, if I was the Duke of black people. And then Walter Block only came back with, well, if I was the king of black people. That's the thing, is that it was all Ben leading into if you
Walter Block, Wakanda Forever.
Oh
yeah. So I had, trust me, Jason, I was not the one who introduced the actually anything having to do with race into that conversation. But I think if I'm remembering correctly, the context was something about the minimum wage and like why. I think I might be getting this wrong. I assume Walter Block does not watch the show, but if he does, and I'm getting this wrong, my apologies. But I think that he was making the claim that like one of the reasons it would be good not to have minimum wage laws is because then like there wouldn't be like so many black people who were unemployed. Like why he had to make it specifically about black people who are unemployed. You know, you can take
he's,
that.
He's bumping Nas before the whole thing. If I rule the world, he's getting fired up. He's like he's like Eminem and 8 Mile before the shit goes down. That's it. The only way that he can say that is if that's what happens beforehand. If he's doing an Eminem 8 Mile kind of.
That's right. He was psyching himself up and he was just in the mood. I don't know why. Yeah. I had the minimum wage and the elevator operators and the something is better than nothing.
Oh yeah, he was super intense about how you had to like admit that that being paid nothing was less than being paid minimum wage. Like that was something like the conversation could go no further until everybody agreed that, you know, that zero was less.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's imagine that guy debating Pascal, Ben.
Yeah, that's man. Actually, I kind of want to have that happen. But yeah, we might have to set that up. But that is like, again, it's the same thing we were talking about earlier, because I would think the only thing that would actually need to be said in that conversation about that particular point is like, well, look, we don't have to speculate. There are all these studies about the employment effects of minimum wage increases, and it doesn't seem to bear out the idea that there's some like huge automatic relationship there. That if you bump up the minimum wage, employment rises also, and so. Because that doesn't seem to actually happen. I mean, even if it did happen, we could still talk about like okay, is this if like 30 million people are making less than $15 an hour, and like 29 of them now get to make a living wage, and 1 million of them lose their jobs? Is that like a net like loss? But like that doesn't seem to happen anyway.
They can't. They cannot engage with data, because once they do that, it's over for them. Because the whole thing they're constructing is completely theoretical. And so it can't be about outcomes. They can't just for clarity, there is no king of the black people.
Okay, thank you.
That's the problem that they have in these arguments, is that as soon as they engage data whatsoever, they're also done, because it's not about outcomes. It has to be about these sort of like primary principles, core principles that are transcendent from people's lived experience. And once they bring it down into the era, the realm of data and evidence, then the whole thing falls apart, because at one point their principles bump up against the evidence. So they can't ever acknowledge that, even though there may be some toeholds. Like you could say like, okay, it's one thing to raise the minimum wage, but would you do it at, $50 an hour? I mean, there's undoubtedly a minimum wage that would begin to undercut the number of jobs.
Sure.
Within the context of the system that we have now. But they can't really engage in that, because then all of a sudden they're no longer libertarians. And it's not just about the government shouldn't interfere into this. They shouldn't allow for child labor laws either.
Right.
Or a 40-hour work week. I mean, honestly, that's the only intellectually consistent plan that they have.
No, I mean, it would be like, I mean, I guess with the child labor, you could argue that, that children are capable of, making contracts, but like certainly a 40-hour week. I mean, if you, from there, what's the difference?
Go back to the Lochner era, and when Brandeis had to argue for child labor laws. I mean, that's what the court held. Was that like, this is the parents? If the parents are okay with it, they can enter into the contract with.
Well, I don't know if you talked about on your show. Was it a couple months ago? There was that piece in the Guardian about how child labor isn't so bad.
I remember that one.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation actually funded the article.
Oh, geez, that doesn't shock me,
because it helps develop third world countries. And so, we shouldn't be like cultural imperialists telling them, they can't have, they can't have child labor. So
who cares if someone loses a finger in a mine?
There you go.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
And I like that picture too. It's one of those real like, see, this is what Africa looks like.
Which one of them?
If I was the king of the black people.
I don't know. Like nobody's wearing a crown here, so I can't tell who the king is.
Yeah, they got so many crowns.
This is Walter Locke's dream. Locke's dream.
God. All right. Well.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam.
Ben, real pleasure. Jason, great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All
nice
right.
To meet you.